Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm a postdoc at Manuel Bütschland's lab, and most of my work revolves around personal light exposure. So I decided today I would like to collect some of the things I work on and put them a little bit into perspective. And so I divided it basically up into three sections: a very up-close view to the data, a look at certain decisions regarding data collection, and also taking a step back towards a little more zoomed out look of things. It is important to note that while I'm sharing work I'm involved in, by no means is this just my own work. All of this is collaborative work, and so a huge shout out to all these talented people. And before we go in to this Dad of the Year nominee, just one very quick note overall. We are going to cover a lot of ground here very quickly, so there is no chance to go into any detail here. So I've put QR codes on basically everything. So if you want to follow up on something, you can go to the recording afterwards and follow up on anything that piques your interest. I want to start with a little bit of reflection here, that while we have seen a lot of aspects of light exposure, most of those were expressed as numbers, as streams of numbers. But really, it helps, I think, that light exposure is a very complex quality that comes from a lot of different elements in our visual environment. So different light sources and different spectral intensities, sometimes not even within our field of view, but still informing the light that comes to our eye. And all of this changes across the time of day and across different tasks. So it is very dependent on our behavior. And the issue that we have here is that we can measure a lot of these things from an exposure perspective. So that, especially with miniaturized technology, that certainly becomes possible. The problem really is that we don't have a really good model to condense everything down into a singular number or metric that we can collect to a lot of or connect to different outcomes that we are interested in, for example, certain health outcomes. And that is not for a lack of choice in metrics. There are a lot of metrics out there in published literature. The table on the right only shows a few of them. You can broadly categorize them depending on whether they focus on spectral composition or the light level. Daniel Wallace yesterday made a wonderful introduction to some duration and timing-based metrics. And it can be very daunting for a researcher to decide which metrics should I calculate and report on or do my statistics on. Should I just use all of them? The thing is, if you look at it from a data-driven perspective, really these metrics are all very highly correlated with one another, significantly correlated, not just within their own category, which is to be expected, but also across categories. But at the same time, each individual metric only carries a very small piece of information about the underlying light exposure pattern. So the best recommendation one can give right now is that you really have to make a deliberate choice about your metric based on the conceptual model that you're having. So you have a hypothesis, and based on that hypothesis, you have to choose a biologically relevant metric. A trivial example would be that if you're interested in artificial light at night, then probably it doesn't make sense to choose a time above 250 lux, because that is a daytime related metric. If you have level-based metrics, then one additional consideration is that you have to describe the underlying distribution of the data. And what we find is, especially if you look into 24-hour time periods of the data, in this example collected at the eye level through a spectacle frame, put on the nightstand at night to collect ambient light levels, is this very specific shape of the distribution, which is basically logarithmic, but also carries a lot of zero lux melanopic EDI values. So we have a zero inflation element going on. And that really informs the choice of descriptor for these types of metrics. So a lot of people know that the mean probably is not the best descriptor because it doesn't represent anything. But I would argue that even the logarithmic mean is not a very good descriptor here because it only covers the non-zero part of the distribution. So things like the median or adding a small offset to your data before logarithmically transforming it, calculating the mean and then reversing the process, which is what is the stand-in for the log zero inflated mean here, are really better descriptors to show this duality of the data that we have between complete darkness and this logarithmic distribution. So those are just a few considerations on the data itself. But you have to collect the data in the first place before you can analyze it. And one of the things that is tragic about that is that we can't really measure what we are actually interested in, which is retinal exposure. And the next best thing is putting something very close to the eye, obviously. So you at least have a relatively high fidelity measurement. The issue is that across anyone you talk to and about any context you can think of, it is the least liked position. It even beats the abomination that is the head pin here. So people really don't want to have light logger very close to their eyes, at least in their current design. Here is hoping for future miniaturization. But it is really an issue right now regarding your study because it can impact compliance negatively because people are not wearing the devices then if they feel uncomfortable, or even recruitment because you don't find enough people that are carrying the device for those prolonged periods of time. The bright side here is that from measurements that we take concurrently with glasses, the wrist, and also the necklace, it seems as though the relative error that you're making, if you're not looking at momentary measurements, but rather daily measures of personal light exposure, are on a very small scale. So most of them are not even significant if you look at different metrics. And those that are mostly are in the 5 to 20% error range for different metrics for the, in this case, the chest position, which I think can be a good enough trade-off for longer periods of data collection. We have to see if this holds across all the different sites that we are looking at the data, but it is very probable. Another aspect is that varying position is just one aspect you have to take into consideration for purchasing or choosing a device. And rather than giving you a long list, we made a little tool where you can just input certain specifications and requirements about your study. You can choose what is important for you and what is not, and it will draw you up a nice little spec sheet that you can go out to a manufacturer with and compare them with the devices they have in store. So hopefully this is a more fun way to not forget about certain considerations. It is only a draft as of now, but you can follow the QR code afterwards and give it a spin and tell us if we've forgotten anything really important in there. Regardless of your choice of device, you will not be able to collect everything with the wearable device. And I'm not talking about outcomes here, I'm talking about context of your data. So when did a person go to sleep? When did they wake up? What was the environmental light exposure like during the data collection timeframe? And this is what we subsume under the heading auxiliary data. So contextually relevant data not caught by the device. Wrist-bound devices often have some kind of automatic wear or non-wear detection, but not so much devices that are worn around the neck or at the glasses level. So you really have to think about these things. And we just put out a preprint describing an auxiliary data strategy, and you can adjust that freely to fit your need. I don't think it's important that everyone collects all of these, but it is important that you think about whether you need them and how you would collect them. It also gives a lot of pointers towards quality assurance and quality control, because all the measurement accuracy in the world from a sensor perspective doesn't get you anywhere if a person is not wearing the device correctly, has low user compliance. So those are things you really want to have a look at. Once you collected the data, you have to analyze them. And I'm very happy for the previous talk because I think that is the right way to develop these kinds of software out in the open. LightLogR is a package for R statistical software that follows in a similar vein. So it is open source. You can go to GitHub and look at the code, contribute. We don't have a sleep visualizer yet. So Danielle, if you want to join in, happy to have you. And so the idea for LightLogR really is to have a one-stop shop for light exposure data from the wearable device, having import functions across the commonly used devices, processing function to clean the data and get them into the right shape, and a common metric interface to calculate metrics such as those that you've seen so far. And basically all the visualizations in this talk are also either made or facilitated through LightLogR. So we think it is a good package, and it is continuously developed. So just to give you a sneak peek about the next version, we will add a few functions that give high-level descriptions about your data set. I think the summary table here will be a particularly favorite one, where we give summary statistics and also calculate automatically certain commonly used metrics, even if those are not conceptually the choices for your specific hypothesis. They make different data sets very comparable with one another. If you want to give LightLogR a spin, but haven't gotten around to it yet, it's a great time now, because just today we are announcing a series of online courses getting advanced or beginner people up to speed using LightLogR starting October 7th. And you can sign up for it now and find out more under the QR code here. So for the final piece, I want to zoom out a little bit into a very cool data collection effort that is ongoing, but that I think very powerfully shows what happens when you collect data across several sites, in this case, all across and beyond Europe, how that shapes light exposure across different sites and populations and also times of the year. And what happens when you share a common framework for how these data are stored, because suddenly you can do the same analyses across multiple sites. And I think this shows a little bit the power that you have when you use open data. I mean, this is very far from the 12,000 data sets that we have in BioDare too, but here is hoping that more people will join the effort, because the questions that I'm asking to my dataset is certainly not the same one that you might be asking my dataset. If you just publish a certain light exposure metric, that might not be useful for a different framework, like a conceptual hypothesis. So we desperately need data out in the open in every dataset that I'm showing here today, and we're going to hear more about two other sites later on. You can go to these QR codes on GitHub and download them, have a look at them today. So really, I think that is a very powerful way to diversify the knowledge pool that is out there. And I hope that more people follow suit. There is a little bit of legwork involved. You have to add metadata to make your data really fair, meaning findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So basically putting it out somewhere where other people can access it without any gated conditions, and adding the necessary metadata regarding participants, dataset level, and so on. All of that de-identified. So we want to have the data anonymous, but if we do, then we still can have a lot of interesting information across different datasets. We are not quite there in terms of tooling to make that as easy as it could be, but we are hard at work towards that. You can go to the GLI website and sign up to the mailing list if you want to be among the first to know more about that. And if you have any kind of data set today that you want to publish alongside your data collection, your analysis, then there is a great collection going on at NPJ Biological Timing and Sleep called Light Exposure in the Real World, where I'm a guest editor. And we are really looking for studies that collect and analyze data under naturalistic conditions, but they are also open to sharing that data so that others can profit as well. So I want to close off with that. Hopefully you got a little insight into the various aspects that we are working on, and all of these are really works in progress. You have to keep that in mind. I don't think the field is done here, but you have to be deliberate about what kind of metric you choose, Hopefully, we are not reinventing the wheel every time we do a new study, but use common pipelines and protocols, which also make things more reproducible. And very hopefully, your data doesn't die at the point when the study gets published, but there is secondary data use by just adding a little bit more information. These levels that I've shown very much inform each other, and I think in one direction that is very clear, but we also see that there are upsides to taking care of one level for another. In the other direction, for example, power analysis gets just so much easier if you have access to a similar data set where you can just calculate variances. And if you have the appropriate auxiliary data, then you will have access to much more powerful metrics down the line, for example, to calculate compliance to recommendations of light exposure. I want to leave you with one last QR code because I can't help myself, but I'm now happy for anything in the Q&A. Thank you very much.